So our featured speaker tonight is David Oppenheimer. He is the owner of the Oppenheimer Gallery in Chicago. They've been at that location for 56 years, a key gallery in the Chicago art scene. They specialize in natural history art, conservation of fine art, framing, and publishing. When I select a speaker for the annual meeting, I try to find someone who's engaging, who will have a visually interesting presentation, one that will appeal to a broad audience, whether you're interested in our history, nature, art, or Olmsted's legacy. And with David, we found one person that meets all those criteria. So he's been very generous with his time. He's been a gracious presenter before he even stepped to the podium. He has brought a number of valuable artworks to display tonight, so he's generous not only with his time, but with the art from his gallery. So with that, I welcome David Oppenheimer to the stage.
Good evening, Riverside, Olmsted Society members. Thank you, Dan. So I hope this presentation proves both engaging and memorable for you. And I was excited to hear Connie mention Catesby. I brought a number of original Catesby engravings here tonight, which you'll see, including the map. These are 1771 Catesbys. I may have a 1754 here as well, with the cute one with all of the insects. The large-scale plates are all original Audubon engravings, double elephant folio from the Havel edition, save the Snowy Owl, which is a print of the original watercolor from the collection of the New York Historical Society, which we have exclusive rights and privileges to make beautiful reproductions of. And then the only non-Catesby or Audubon piece is at the very end. I have a Wilson engraving of woodpeckers, various species that he engraved and wrote about during his time. He was a contemporary of Audubon's. So we're going to start with the map tonight. And this may look very familiar to you. This is the New York Public Library copy of the general plan. They have a really nice digital image, which I'm using tonight. Have you ever gone for a stroll down Catesby and wondered who or what Catesby was? Or perhaps you've taken a walk on Audubon Road and wondered who or what Audubon was. The name Audubon may bring to mind the Audubon Society. Am I close enough to this? The Audubon Society, which has national or local organizations and local organizations around our country, and it may also bring to mind birds, which is very correct. But did you know that a complete set of John James Audubon's great work, The Birds of America, is one of the most valuable books in the world, with documented prices reaching up to $11.57 million. In fact, if you go to the Wikipedia page of the world's most expensive books, guess whose portrait pops up at the top? That is John James Audubon, whose Birds of America, which is enormous, appears on that page 8 times. This set of books is so large, it's on double elephant folio paper, and I brought original examples here this evening to illustrate how large and impressive these are, seeing it's hard to comprehend a book that's this big. It often requires its own piece of furniture. It's a set of 4 books. There's 435 plates in one of these. It was produced over 12 years. And these are 2 of my favorite people. Next to an Audubon folio, just to give you a sense of scale of how large it is and impressive it is to be next to one of these. And to think that these were produced in between 1826 and 1838 is even more impressive. It's a time before television. That's a little bit A little close-up. The naturalists, whose names mark Riverside streets, Bartram, Michaux, Audubon, Natal, and Catesby, were not merely catalogers of plants and animals. They were observers of systems, how species relate to habitat, climate, and one another. This same ecological attentiveness underpins Frederick Law Olmsted's vision for landscape design. Olmsted believed that nature, when carefully preserved and composed, could restore the human mind, encourage moral reflection, and foster civic harmony. Riverside's plan reflects this shared worldview, nature not as decoration, but as a living structure deserving respect, study, and restraint. This evening, I invite you to take a walk with me through our lovely neighborhood to learn more about the great naturalists of the 1700s and 1800s who Olmsted chose to honor with road names. And before I jump into things, I just want to thank again Dan. I also want to thank all the Olmsted Society for inviting me here this evening, my lovely wife, and Matthew, who is helping me this evening. He works very hard with me at our gallery. I also want to thank Aberdeen Marszalska for making the introduction. And with that, we're going to start here. This may look familiar to some of you. This is from the 1970 handbook. And for those of you who haven't read Heydrich's handbook and the origins of some Riverside street names, or you may not remember this December 1988 article on Riverside street names from the Landmark, we're going to go for a walk. And when we look at Olmsted's vision, I'm actually going to zoom out for a second. The overview of the general plan and the origins of the street names, blah, blah, blah. Okay. The perimeter streets are all toponymic titles, meaning that the road names are derived from the scenery on which it is situated. And starting as we walk around the perimeter, we'll see Riverside Road. We see Fairbank Road, Blooming Bank Road. Just north of that, we see Woodside Road, which ran along the planned park there. And just north of that, we've got North Wood, North Gate at the northern border, East Grove, near the little East Grove Park. And then we have the Delaplane, which is, means of the plain in French. From there, the Riverside roads are then divided into two distinct groups. We have the honorary roads that are south of the tracks. These all honor individuals and elements from Riverside's history. Then north of the tracks, we have roads that are honorary titles and names of naturalists, landscape architects, and poets and writers that Olmsted would have found influential. Starting with Berry Point, which is probably the oldest road here. We take a look at a map of old Indian or Native American trails. We can see the Portage Trail and Mud Lake and a few other landmarks that you may be familiar with. We also see the Berry Point Trail running right where our Long Common is. And Long Common was laid in the bed of the Berry Point Trail, and the tail end of it retained the name Berry Point. And this was part of the greater Green Bay network of trails that existed and predated the general plan. We have the Mill Bridge Road, which is at the juncture of the bridge over the Lions Bridge over the Des Plaines and the Forbes sawmill. And then, of course, Scotswood Road, after General Winfield Scott, who camped here with his troops. Moving eastward, we have Black Hawk Road, named after Chief Black Hawk, who was an instrumental participant in the Black Hawk War. This is the McKinney Hall portrait. All of the after he surrendered, he did kind of a celebrity tour around the East Coast and had his portrait taken in Washington, D.C. And this is after the Charles Burt King portrait. I had actually brought this piece, but I forgot it in my car. We have Gage Road, named after David Gage, who sold the 1,600 acres to the Riverside Improvement Company, Lawton, spelled a little bit differently than the original spelling, which was Laughdon, after David and Bernadette Lawton, who established themselves here in the 1820s. And we have Burlington and Quincy, named after the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad, as it was called at that time. Moving northward, north of the tracks, we're going to get into some of these more inspirational names that Olmsted would have called upon when developing his plan. Starting with Uvedale, this is after Sir Uvedale Price. He was a British landscape architect who Olmsted found in high regard. He wrote this amazing and pivotal essay on the picturesque as compared with the sublime and the beautiful, and on the use of studying pictures for the purpose of improving real landscape. Now, this is the first of many very long titles. Now, I won't read all of them to you, but they liked to be descriptive. And we're going to go through these relatively quickly. We've got Repton Road. This is after Humphrey Repton, a prominent landscape architect of the late 1700s. And he used this rather revolutionary method of displaying his creations to prospective clients with these pop-up red books. This is from Fernie Hall. And you see the before photo, or this is a painting, and then the after of the landscape architecture changes he'd be considering making. We have John Claudius Loudon. This was a prolific British botanist, garden designer, and influential writer whose books and journals shaped 19th century thinking on horticulture, landscape, and public space. He advanced and popularized principles advocating permanent open land, park systems, and green corridors around and within cities. He was also a bit of a naturalist himself. And these are ideas that anticipate and strongly align with Frederick Law Olmsted's later park and parkway systems. He also was responsible for the Derby Arboretum in Britain, which was one of the first large-scale public arboretums, and he, in fact, popularized and coined the word arboretum. His wife, Jane Loudon, was also an accomplished naturalist who developed the Ladies' Flower Garden of Ornamental Annuals. Moving on to Andrew Jackson Downing. Now, he has a direct relation to Olmsted. He was born in 1815, and he's widely regarded as the father of American landscape architecture. Through his writings and designs, he advanced the idea that landscapes, public and private, should harmonize with nature while serving moral, social, and civic purposes. He worked on the Smithsonian Institution grounds, and during travels to England in the early 1850s, Downing recruited Calvert Vaux, bringing him to the United States. After Downing's untimely death in 1852, Vaux went on to partner with Frederick Law Olmsted, as we all know, in 1857. Moving on, we have John Evelyn for Evelyn Road. He was an English writer, gardener, and early natural philosopher, and a founding member of the Royal Society. His 1664 publication, Silva, or A Discourse of Forest Trees, was among, I'm not going to read the whole thing, was among the earliest and most influential works on forestry, advocating sustainable woodland management and long-term stewardship. William Kent, for Kent Road, was an English landscape architect, painter, and structural architect, whose work in the early 18th century helped establish the naturalistic style of English landscape gardening. He predated Capability Brown, and Kent rejected formal geometric layouts in favor of formal, picturesque compositions inspired by classical painting, an approach that laid essential groundwork for later developments in landscape design. William Southcote was an English landowner and early landscape designer, and he was best known for his work at Woburn Farm. There he created one of the earliest and most influential examples of the farne orne, or ornamental farm, blending productive agriculture with picturesque landscape designs. A contemporary and associate of William Kent and other leading gardeners of the period, Southcote helped advance the idea that beauty, utility, and naturalism could coexist within a single designed landscape. Oh. There we go. Shenstone, William Shenstone, was an English poet and landscape gardener as well. And he had the estate of the Michaux and became one of the most influential early examples of the ornamental farm as well, and which is something that Olmsted was very interested in. Like William Southcote, Shenstone demonstrated that poetry, agriculture, and landscape design could be unified into a coherent natural experience. And here we have an image of this space. Addison, Joseph Addison, was a British writer, poet, and statesman whose essays helped shape early 18th century ideas about taste and nature. His name is preserved at Oxford even today for Addison's Walk, which is a picturesque path that you can still walk on to this day. Abraham Cowley. The works of Abraham Cowley. There we go. This was a 17th century English poet, best known for his metaphysical style, combining intellectual complexity and imaginative engagement with nature. His most famous poem was The Mistress. I'm going to try to get through this quickly. We've got Robert Herrick. Oops, there he goes. This was a 17th century English lyric poet associated with the Cavalier tradition, known for poems celebrating time, nature, and the fleeting beauty of life. His best known poem, To the Virgins to Make Much Time, you may know it more recently from Robin Williams reciting it in the film The Dead Poets Society. And George Herbert. This was an English, there he is, poet and an Anglican priest whose devotional verse is central to the metaphysical tradition. And he had a rather interesting title that I shall repeat here for his great work, and he was a favorite of King James I. Now we're going to take a look at, as we mentioned, Connie mentioned earlier, Catesby Road. For those of you who haven't looked this closely at the general plan. Audubon, Bartram, Michaux, and Natal. So what is a naturalist, and why were they important? Here we see John James Audubon crossing this precarious tree with his bird, gun, tomahawk, and buckskins. And now we get a little bit more context. A naturalist in the 17th and 18th centuries was not necessarily an academic specialist working at a safe distance. These were frontiersmen, living at the edge of the known world and at the frontier of knowledge, where science, art, and exploration intersected. They worked before modern disciplines were separated, when to study nature required travel, physical endurance, and, of course, personal risk, as we see Audubon here undertaking. They crossed unsettled landscapes, endured disease, political suspicion sometimes, and every now and then financial ruin. Often working without institutional support, their drawings and texts were not secondary illustrations, but these were primary data, acts of observation on which future science depended. And risking their lives, fortunes, and reputations, these naturalists fundamentally expanded how humans understood their place within the natural world, transforming nature from a backdrop into a system worthy of study, respect, and preservation. And here we see the full image. Their drawings and descriptions were tools of knowledge, but also acts of reverence. Olmsted translated that same reverence into the land itself. Where Bartram and Michaux mapped forests, Olmsted shaped roads, greenways, and sightlines to follow natural contours, preserving ecological logic rather than imposing geometry. Riverside is, in effect, a three-dimensional natural history study. Here, we see Audubon's original watercolor, this is courtesy of the New York Historical Society, of plate 181, the Golden Eagle. And this is actually the only instance where Audubon drew himself into the birds of America. In the Havel engraving of this, Audubon is omitted. He doesn't appear at all. So starting with Mark Catesby, this map is actually here tonight. You can take a look at it. That is the original map. That is, so take a close look at it. Mark Catesby was among the first to present American plants and animals as integrated ecological communities. His work rejected isolation in favor of relationship. Meadows, groves, and rivers, blah, blah, blah. I don't like that part. Let's skip that. Let's take a look at the map. Mark Catesby was born in England in 1683. He traveled to colonial America in 1712, accompanying his sister after inheriting funds from his recently deceased father. He undertook two major expeditions to North America, traversing the southern colonies. We've got Virginia, Carolina, Florida, and the West Indies. He returned to England in 1726 and spent the next 20 years, just to give you a sense of how long it took to make these things, assembling this great work. And I forgot to bring this title sheet. I have it on my desk at home. His great work, The Natural History of Carolina, Florida, and the Bahama Islands, containing the figures of birds, beasts, fishes, serpents, insects, and plants, particularly the forest trees, shrubs, and other plants not hitherto described or very incorrectly figured by authors, together with their descriptions in English and French, to which are added observations on the air, soil, and waters, with remarks upon agriculture, grain, pulse, roots, etc. to the whole is prefixed a new and correct map, the one that we just took a look at, of the countries treated of by Mark Catesby, FRS. And that's a fellow of the Royal Society. And you'll see a number of titles like that around here. And then we have the French, and then the publication date at the bottom. This is 1731. Well, Catesby did put up some of the capital for the publication himself. The undertaking for his natural history was so expensive that he not only needed the help of others, such as the Quaker merchant Peter Collinson, a fellow of the Royal Society. Here we see a prospectus, which is telling people what this is and what you're going to get for subscribing to Catesby's natural history. Now, subscriptions were required not just for the production of these works, but sometimes for the actual expeditions themselves. And we see some of the earliest subscribers as a list of encouragers, which you'll see a lot of dukes and lords and ladies on here. And they required tremendous funds to make one of these happen. And I brought this plate here tonight as well. The images of Catesby's bird and animal specimens were often paired with botanical specimens. Here we see the now extinct parrot of Carolina paired with a cypress tree. And here we see the text. So there was descriptive text that talked about each specimen and sometimes described it for the first time. And we see the cypress of America. We're going to take a look at this. This is the bastard of Baltimore, which we now know as the orchard oriole, shown with a Riverside favorite. Can anybody name that tree? That's right. So we're going to take a look at a little bit of this text, and I'm actually going to read just right from the text itself. Because it's fun. Weighs 13 pennyweights. The bill is sharp-pointed, the throat black, the tail brown, as are its wings. Having most of the feathers verged with white, all the rest of the bird is yellow, the breast being brightest, the hen being as handsomely clothed, though with very different colored feathers, induced me to give the figures of both. Then, I'm going to stop there. Oh. Sorry, is that better? Then I'm going to read from the catalpa tree, and just to illustrate how early this was. This tree was unknown to the inhabited parts of Carolina, till I brought the seeds from the remoter parts of the country. And though the inhabitants are little curious in gardening, yet the uncommon beauty of the tree has induced them to propagate it. And 'tis become an ornament to many of their gardens, and probably will be the same to ours in England, it being as hardy as most of our American plants, many of them now at Mr. Christopher Gray's in Fulham. This is a slightly later copy than that. Having stood out several winters, which is kind of interesting. Is that Hoxton? And produced plentifully their beautiful flowers without any protection except the first year. Sometimes specimens were drawn in an unusual fashion, and Catesby often played with the scale of his specimens on the sheet to make the best use of real estate. Here we see the American bison winking at us, but he looks like a miniature compared to this rose acacia shrub. even though the first edition of Catesby's work took nearly 20 years to complete, with the first part being printed in 1729, and as you saw on the title sheet, it actually wasn't issued till 1731, and the final 20 plates for the appendix being issued in 1747, its impact was immense. And a second edition was issued, beginning in 1754, and a third again being issued in 1771. All from the original copper plates. And this 1771 edition continued to be printed into the early 1800s. And I did bring this plate here tonight, but I think it's in that folio. Here we can see examples of the blue heron from the first, second, and third editions. And notably, these were all copperplate engravings, and most of the works of art that you see here are copperplate engravings. And one of the advantages and disadvantages to copper is that it's soft. And as the plate is used again and again, it gets softer and softer, and the lines get softer and softer. So to compensate for that, they color them more lavishly later on in the project. So these earlier Catesbys are actually less blue, even in perfect condition. This is John Bartram now. And he was America's first professional botanist and the father of William Bartram. So there were two Bartrams. They were both naturalists. And he traveled extensively throughout the eastern regions of there we go. That's his book, publication, of the American colonies, documenting native plant life through direct observation in the field. Much of this work was also supported by Peter Collinson at the Royal Society, and Bartram collected seeds for him, so his interest was both scientific and commercial. And these seeds were sent to England and then sold. There was a great taste for all things American at this time. It was very exciting. And also notably, you will see that the Bartram book, even though Bartram Sr., John, is an American, the book is dedicated to His Majesty because America was still a subject of the crown at this time. And at the very right here, we see Bartram's garden, which is what he's best known for. This is the very first botanic garden in the United States. And interestingly, you can still visit it today. Now, this is his son, William Bartram, born in 1739. And that's the frontispiece. That's not actually William Bartram. This is the book he wrote. And the first thing you might notice is that this is not dedicated to the king, as this was published in 1794 after the American Revolution. We can see some of his foldouts here. These are engravings as well, but they were not colored like Catesby's. And unlike Catesby's work, which had 220 images, all lavishly colored, Bartram's work, there's the oak leaf hydrangea, only had 7 plates. This is all 7 of the plates in this book. The rest of it is entirely descriptive. And that is Bartram's sandpiper. This is a drawing by John James Audubon. And many of the species that these individuals discovered, they would name after themselves. This is an interesting one. This is André Michaux. Now there's also 2 Michaux. André and Francois André Michaux. He had two major publications, the Oaks of North America and the Flora of North America. Here we see a red and white oak. And there's a very interesting story associated with the elder Michaux. He was sent over to America by Louis XVI, he was French, to document the flora of the United States. And while he was here botanizing, the French Revolution occurred. And Louis XVI was beheaded. And this left Michaux with a lot of back pay that he was not able to receive. And to recoup his funds, he came to the American Philosophical Society to plan an expedition. And the American Philosophical Society at this time was led by Thomas Jefferson himself. And this expedition was to be westward. This was before Lewis and Clark. However, this project collapsed after he fell into political disfavor for conspiring with the new French government to free Louisiana from the Spanish at the time. And this document from the American Philosophical Society this is all of the individuals who subscribed to this idea of the expedition west. And this document is the only document that has 4 living presidents' signatures on it. And we can see each president's signature, as well as all the other subscribers, along with the amount of money that they dedicated to this expedition. And at the top we can see Washington, who dedicated $100 to this, John Adams for $20. Washington was the only one who pledged $100. There's also Madison and Jefferson on there as well. And this is the younger Michaux, the Francois. And we see Bartram's oak. And this is most likely who Frederick Law Olmsted was referring to, as there are many specimens in this book that he may have referred to when, or been inspired by, when developing Riverside. So this is the North American Silva, published between 1811 and 1819. And we're going to take a look at a couple of these plates here. And I just selected Riverside specimens. And these are very lovely 4-tree engravings. Some of them were even done by Pierre-Joseph Redité, who was very well known in France as Josephine Bonaparte's personal flower painter, and he painted all of her flower gardens, roses specifically, at Malmaison. And this is the overcup white oak, or Quercus macrocarpa, which is the bur oak. I wanted to talk about some of the other specimens. The black walnut and the coffee tree. They have the dogwood, the sugar maple, and the swamp white oak. Following, we have Nuttall, Thomas Nuttall. And he was the arboreal successor to Francois Michaux. It even says so in the title of this book, which is fun because of what it says. The North American Silva, or a description of the forest trees of the United States, Canada, Nova Scotia, not described in the works of Francois Andrew Michaux, and containing all the forest trees discovered in the Rocky Mountains, the territory of Oregon, down to the shores of the Pacific and into the confines of Carolina, as well as in various parts of the United States. And here are some of his specimens. I've included this is a linden tree and a pesky tree called a Carolina buckthorn. So after Francois, Nuttall's expedition went deeper into the country as it had become more expanded and explored, and it was easier to traverse. Keep in mind, there were no roads west before it was explored. It was just wilderness. And this is the most adorable plate from the evening. This is another Audubon lithograph from his viviparous quadrupeds, and this is Nuttall's hair. And finally, we're going to take another look at John James Audubon, who is the most renowned naturalist of his generation and the most widely recognized figure tonight. He was born in 1785 in what is now Haiti, the illegitimate son of a French naval captain and his chambermaid. As a young man, he was recalled to France, formally adopted by his father and his wife, and given the name which he is known for today. In 1803, to spare his son from conscription into the Napoleonic Wars, Audubon's father secured a false passport that allowed him to travel to the United States. Audubon settled for a time at his family's property, Mill Grove, near Philadelphia. Although he pursued several commercial ventures in his early adulthood, birds remained his constant fascination. And he ultimately devoted himself to observing, documenting, and painting them from life. Audubon's work fundamentally altered the natural sciences. His images presented birds as living creatures, as you can see here today, embedded in specific landscapes rather than isolated specimens, using scientific observation with dramatic realism. Beyond his artistic achievement, Audubon was also the first known naturalist to practice bird banding, tying threads to birds' legs to confirm the return of the same specimen year after year. So we're going to return to Catesby's Carolina parrot, and we're going to find out what made Audubon so magnificent. This is 100 years of progress. Excuse me. And we see nearly every lifelike detail in the Carolina parrot here. And he developed special techniques for wiring his bird specimens. Audubon depicted his animals not just as specimens, but as living beings within specific habitats. So how do you read one of these plates? And what do all the elements mean? We see next to each specimen on the sheet a number. Each number corresponds to a specimen in the legend. So we see the number 1 next to this parrot. If we take a look at the title, we see the common name, the Latin name, and the numbers of each specimen. We see males 1, F, which is for female, 2, and young, 3. We see the Latin name. We also see the cuckolbur, which is the specimen of plant that this animal is situated with. At the bottom right, we see engraved, printed, and colored by R. Havel and Son, London. Bottom left, we see drawn from nature and published by John James Audubon, FRSE MWS. And FRSE means Fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. MWS means member of the Wernerian Society. And then some of the later plates will actually say FLS, Fellow of the Linnaean Society, but that didn't happen until after this specific plate was engraved. The top left we see the part number. This is part number 6. And as a subscriber, you would have received John James Audubon's Birds of America in parts, 5 plates at a time. So part number 6 would have plate 26, 27, 28, 29, and 30 included with it. Each Bird of America plate that Havel created had a preparatory watercolor drawing that Audubon himself had drawn. These are all owned by the New York Historical Society, and they're all owned by the New York Historical Society, and they were sold by Lucy Audubon in the 1860s. And this is the original, and we can see just how lifelike Audubon's hand is here. You also see specific notes about the specimens and notes the engraver. And this is Audubon's watercolor of the wild turkey. This is one of his most favorite birds. He believed it should be our nation's bird instead of the bald eagle. He also used it for his personal insignia that said, "America, my country." He also had a pet wild turkey for a time, which I could read the excerpt from if you'd like. I don't know what time it is. Okay. Just because it's fun to hear it from Audubon's words. It became so tame that it would follow any person who called it, and was the favorite of the little village. Yet it would never roost with the tame turkeys, but regularly betook itself at night to the roof of the house, where it remained until dawn. When 2 years old, it began to fly to the woods, where it remained for a considerable part of the day, to return to the enclosure as night approached. It continued this practice until the following spring, when I saw it several times fly from its roosting place at the top of a high cottonwood tree on the bank of the Ohio, from which, after resting a little, it would sail to the opposite shore, the river being there nearly half a mile wide, and return towards the night. One morning I saw it fly off at a very early hour to the woods in another direction. Several days elapsed, but the bird did not return. I was going towards some lakes near Green River to shoot, when, having walked about 5 miles, I saw a fine large gobbler cross the path before me, moving leisurely along. Turkeys being then in prime condition for the table, I ordered my dog to chase it and put it up. The animal went off with great rapidity, and as it approached the turkey, I saw, with great surprise, that the latter paid little attention. Juno was on the point of seizing it when she suddenly stopped and turned her head toward me. I hastened to them, but you may easily conceive my surprise when I saw my own favorite bird, and discovered that it had recognized the dog, and would not fly from it, although the sight of a strange dog would have caused it to run off at once. A friend of mine, happening to be in search of a wounded deer, took the bird on his saddle before me and carried it home for me. The following spring, it was accidentally shot, having been taken for a wild bird, and brought to me on being recognized by the red ribbon which it had around its neck. Hunters are hunters then and now, as Richard Rhodes says. This is not that specific turkey. He painted this turkey at a later time. Because this bird was so beloved by Audubon, he made it his first plate in the Birds of America. And I did bring this exact plate that you're seeing up here tonight, the one on the right. This is a very early plate state. And this only says plate 1. It doesn't even have a part number. And you'll notice a few differences between this plate and many of the other plates in the Birds of America. First, you'll see that it's engraved by William Lazars. The first 10 plates of the birds of America were originally engraved by W. Lazars, and his colorists happened to go on strike after 10 plates, leaving Audubon without an engraver. This only says plate 1. Also, notably, the edge of this plate is untrimmed. This print was never bound into a book. You'll see, if you take a close look at it, it has an original deckled edge to it, which is very rough. And if you take an even closer look at it and pass some light through, you'll see the original watermark, and every single original Audubon plate has either a J. Watman or J. Watman Turkey Mill watermark with the year of production. It was very early, 1826. And this is the Field Museum's copy of the wild turkey, which is a much later plate state, and you can see that it was retouched by R. Havel Jr. The wild turkey title has been changed to wild turkey from the Great American Cock, and it now has a part number, so it's more consistent with the rest of the plates, and it says plate 1. Subsequently, Audubon created a miniature edition called the octavo edition, the Royal Octavo, which refers to the paper size. So this piece is 1/8 the size of a royal sheet of paper, not 1/8 the size of one of these double elephant folio papers. For some of the more complicated species, like this image, Audubon had to change the composition a little bit. You see, this is greatly simplified. And these were all created using a technique called lithography, and they were hand-colored lithographs. And these were made using a camera lucida, whereby the lithographer would look through a prism to see the image of the original engraved plate and then draw on a stone the lithographic image. And these were all issued in parts by subscription as well. And I did bring some of these original parts with me. They're called, each part is called a fascicle. And these would then, as many of you may have seen original Audubon folios, they're bound, or even these octavos are bound into leather books, typically. But before that happened, they were issued to the subscribers as these little fascicles. So it's an interesting curiosity to take a look at. And I'm going to conclude tonight, before getting into Audubon quadrupeds, and just close with, in Riverside, the legacy of American natural history does not hang on a wall. It is embedded in the ground plan. The same intellectual current that produced Audubon's birds and Michaux's forest shaped Olmsted's landscapes. Together, they reflect a distinctly American idea that understanding nature, preserving it, and living within it are inseparable acts. Now, I'm available for questions if anybody wants to ask me anything.
Thank you very much. Very fascinating. I have two unrelated questions.
Sure.
So when you were going through all the names of Olmsted's inspirers, it occurred to me, and I never asked before, like, did Olmsted collect all these volumes and annotate them? And if so, where are they? That's one question. And then the other question, unrelated, but to Audubon, someone that knows very little, but it strikes me as what's interesting is they are pretty close to one-to-one scale, which is a very unique perspective, it seems. And so those are my two questions.
Yes. I'll start with the first, or the second one, actually, because that I know a lot about, and I meant to mention that Audubon insisted that each specimen be life-sized. And when it says drawn from nature, every single bird in the Birds of America, all 435 plates are drawn to scale. So that's why he used such a large piece of paper called double elephant folio. So the smaller specimens are actually, the copper plates are smaller, but they were still on the very large paper. So I didn't bring a small plate here tonight, but it'll be this gigantic piece of paper this big, 39 by 26 inches, and with a small plate impression of 16 by 20. So yes, that is a very good observation. I should have mentioned that. And to the first question, I'm not specifically an Olmsted expert, but I can say that some of these I did read about in Olmsted's writings, like the Uvidel Price and Repton. He specifically mentions those books as being like invaluable to him growing up. Others I kind of collected and surmised by his interests, and others, such as Downing, were integral parts of his own personal history. In terms of where his original collection is, that I don't know.
I have two of those Birds of America books, the smaller books. Are those worth anything?
That depends. So the Birds of America was only issued in 2 sizes. So it's either going to be this full double elephant folio size, or let me grab an octavo. I did bring one here. As well as the fascicle. So this, can you guys hear me? Yeah. This is the octavo size. This is an original lithograph. If it's between these 2 sizes, it's not original. The lithograph stones were only this big, and the engraved plates were only this big. Some of the, if it's a book that's leather bound and it has a title sheet that says 1839, 1840 on it, then it could be original. Also, the octavos were very, very popular, and they were reissued multiple times throughout the 1800s. So this is a first edition plate. There's a second edition, which is quite a bit less valuable, and then there's even 3rd, 4th, and 5th edition plates. All of them are very old still. We're talking about reprints that are from the 1800s, but they command quite a bit less value. So a first edition, that's something. Additionally, a complete set of these is 7 volumes. It's a stack of 7 books, and I have a few of them. I was going to bring them tonight, but it's just too much stuff. But it's like this on your bookshelf of leather-bound volumes of the Birds of America. It's 500 plates. So you might have 2, miscellaneous and an incomplete set, but there are also a lot of reproductions that, again, are very old. There's reproductions from the 1900s that are 100 years old now, and people call me all the time. That's one of the question I get multiple times a week, where it's like, is my Audubon real? And it just depends, because they'll be like, oh, I inherited it from my grandpa. I'm like, it doesn't matter, because it could be a reprint that's 100 years old. But if you want to show me a picture of it, I could probably tell you within about 10 seconds.
I may have got it wrong, but I thought you were talking about the paper sizes, and one of those was a royal sheet.
That's right.
How big is that?
Well, it's 8 of these. So unfold this, and then unfold it, and then unfold it. So it's 26 or so would be my guess. I could do the math, but I'm not going to do it here on stage.
Actually, this is not a question, but I can't resist. When the Riverside Improvement Company was developing Riverside, they wanted it to be a very prestige suburb. And as part of that, they imported some exotic birds. Sparrows.
Cool. I didn't know that.
Any other questions? Maybe one more and then we'll wrap things up.
My other question to you, when he went bird watching with a gun, right?
Oh, yeah.
Shot most of his specimens. Was that a part of bird watching back then? Because Teddy Roosevelt and they all went bird watching with a BB gun. Was that a popular thing back then?
The majority of the specimens were shot and killed. That's how it was done. There was no photography. You couldn't get a bird to sit still. And actually, he did get a bird to sit still, I think, once. He found a broad-winged hawk, and he was able to pose it, and it just like did what he wanted. But most of the time, they were killed, and many times, many specimens were killed. They were eaten. If you read his notes, he talks about what these animals tasted like, and he had a tremendous amount of respect for the animals and the birds. And actually, if you have time for one quote, Richard Rose in his book writes like a very brief passage about this, which I think it's good to hear, because it's hard to understand, like, how could somebody who loves birds so much go out and kill them? And so if you'll spare me one moment. Okay. I came prepared. In early 19th century America, when wild game was still extensively harvested for food, observation for hunting had not yet disconnected from observation for scientific knowledge. Much of what seems contradictory in his narratives, learning birds, studying birds, concerning himself with their population dynamics and stresses, but also killing birds for food and sport, sometimes in great numbers, follows from this fact. To argue that he should have known better is anachronistic and nostalgic. Animals are killed today in far greater numbers, domestic animals slaughtered for food, but they are killed by hired workers behind closed doors. So it was part of the wilderness life. This is just a very completely different time. Audubon often supported himself and his family on just purely his hunting skills with food.
All right.
We good?
David, thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.